Okay, so I'm Mary. I'm the archives chair for Nassau General Service, and I'm here with Jimmy O in Long Beach. Today is February 10th, 2018, and Jimmy's going to just tell us a little bit about his sobriety and he has some great memories of his relationship with Lois Wilson. And so Jimmy, first, maybe you could tell us, when did you get sober?
I'm sober 44 years.
Okay, and you've always been a member of
AA.
Of Serenity AM?
No, I was in different groups as I got. I was in the Long Beach group when it started. I was in the Cedarhurst group. I would go to. But I stayed through the grace of God. I was able to take step one. I was a functioning drunk. I worked. I was in a relationship with a codependent girl, naturally. And I knew of AA, but I had I had an image of AA as something like the Salvation Army. You go there to give you a cup of soup, you sing a few songs to Jesus, you know what I mean?
Okay.
And that was it. But how I got into AA was my girlfriend called me up. I always say she was stunning, she was gorgeous, but she had the voice of Audrey Meadows from the Honeymooners, you know? And she said those words. She said, "We got to talk." I said, "We got to talk about what?" She says, "You know," and hangs up. And I knew I was in trouble. I don't know what I did. Whatever I did, I'm going to hear the mouth, you know? So a bell went off, and I really took a spot check inventory of myself and my drinking. And I knew that I didn't ask whether you were an alcoholic or not. I knew I had gotten in trouble many times with drinking, but I knew I could always stop on my own, which I did. But something told me, Jimmy, you are at a point in your life where you got to stay stopped. How do you stay stopped? And all I saw was this thing, AA. So to get her off my back, I said, "Let me go over there." So I called AA and I said, "Are you AA?" And I said, "Now listen to me very carefully." And I told him about this fictitious uncle of mine. And the guy listened. And then he asked me, "Do you think you have a problem? You have a problem with alcohol?" What are you kidding? And I said, "All right, a little bit, little thing." And he told me there's a meeting in Long Beach that night. And it was very interesting. I had a love affair at that time with Gallo Hardy Burgundy wine. And I had a gallon in there. Mm-hmm. And that man said, "Do you have any alcohol in the house?" I said, "Of course." He said, "We suggest that you pour it out." And I opened up the refrigerator and I got the phone on my neck and I'm pouring this thing out. And I went to the meeting that night. I walked in, got there. I get dressed up because you're going among these poor things. You know what I mean? Really, And you have such class, So I got all dressed up and I came in and I sat down and I saw the shades and I saw step one. And that leaped off the pages right at me. And it was saying to me what I already knew, but I didn't know how to verbalize. Mm. And I felt like I entered into something like a set of gloves, hands coming together. This is your home. This is where you belong. And I took that step to heart that night, Mm-hmm. And the fact that they told me, "We're not saying you're never going to drink again. All we say is you don't drink for today. Can you do that?" And I said, "Of course, you idiots. What do you?" And that's how and each time I grew I go to a meeting, somebody said something. It was like a piece of a puzzle. Yes. And I just fell in love with the program. And, when I came in those days, there was no meetings in Nassau County on Saturdays. You went to meeting, no, there was none. 1994. 1974. you went to meetings Saturday night,
Okay.
but there was no meetings during the day. And I said, well, where do you go? And they said, well, oh, no, you go tonight. I said, well, and I started the first AA meeting in Nassau County on Saturday afternoons, high noon, in Long Beach.
Okay.
Yeah, I started that. And the Episcopal priest at St. James Church was there. He loved AA. And, you know, I look back, the rent was $15 a month. Oh, my God.
Can't even make coffee for that.
All right. And he gave it the name. He said, what's the name of the group? I said, I don't know. And at that time, there was a famous movie out with Gary Cooper, a black and white movie called High Noon. Mm-hmm. And there was the song, Do Not Forsake Me, oh my, all right? He said, why don't you call it High Noon? I said, all right. And that's how we got the name. And it's history ever since. Okay. So through the grace of God, I mean, learned so much with the steps and so on and so forth. Now, I had this great aunt of mine who I dreaded. I always say, you know the slogan, live and let live? She never heard of it. And I knew she went to this, I couldn't even pronounce it, this Al-Anon thing, Al-Anon, I don't know what it was. But she would come down here to visit her sister, who was my grandmother who lived here. And I would be drinking, and she would follow me from room to room with the first step, you know. And it's the first drink that gets you drunk. And have you turned your will and you're like, oh, good God, you know. She was a... But one day she said something to me that really hit me between the eyes. She said, you know, brother, when you stop drinking, you're not giving up anything. You're getting rid of something that's ruining your life. And boy, that hit me right between the eyes. I knew she was right. So you might say I was on my way to a bottom. Mm-hmm. And it came when my significant other, said, we got to talk. So it's been a journey. It's been I'm so grateful to have gotten into the program. Now, my aunt, I knew she went to this Al-Anon thing, whatever you call it. One time, I was drinking and I was having and I look out my window here and a van pulls up. And you slide the door, and there's my great aunt with about 10 people from Al-Anon. Oh, good Jesus, here we go. She came to say hello, right? And they would come in here, and I, in my paranoia, they had that Al-Anon look, you know what I mean? And you knew they were talking about me, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. Mm-hmm. And here we go. I had to get the speech. I'm going to tell Bill on you, and I don't know what she was talking about. But in recovery, I waited about a year. And then I called her up, and I broke the news to her. How you doing, Aunt Sue, so on and so forth. And I said, listen, I'm sure you heard of that AA thing. Oh, yes. Blah, blah, blah. I said, well, I'm in it. Well, she was elated. Oh, my God, why didn't you call me and tell me? Why did I said, So that's what brought us together. Now, her husband had just died. He had 25 years in AA then, Jack. And they were very close. Jack and Bill Wilson were very close because Jack was a West Point graduate, and he wound up a derelict in the street. Bill was in World War I in the artillery division or something. And they loved to talk about guns and wars. Oh, once they got started, the two of them, So my aunt called me up one day and she says, Jimmy dear, could you do me a favor? I said, sure. I want to see my friend in Westchester, Lois Wilson. Would you drive me up? I said, sure. So she had her ritual. She would go Saturday, she'd go to the beauty parlor. I would pick her up. We would go. We went in there, and this is my nephew, Jimmy, who's an AA, boom, boom. And Lois hugged me and kissed me and hugged. and her and I just cemented together. And my knowledge of Bill Wilson is really hearsay from what Lois would tell me. And many, many times I was with Lois and Sue. I would take them out for rides in the car, and they would reminisce. Susie, remember Bill when we did, and they would tell me stories that are just not written down. Or I would be in the kitchen with Lois, and she would be cooking lunch for me, and she would just start telling me stories. Now, one is that is not written down. And she told me this twice. She shared with me Bill Wilson's encounter in Towns Hospital with his spiritual awakening.
Okay.
And that he went through a depression for 3 days. He remembers, I felt like I was falling down a well backwards, and when do you hit the bottom? And he said, now Ebby had planted the seed, find a God of your understanding, because Bill was against organized religion, like many drunks are. And he cried out to himself, if there is a God, show yourself to me. It was a cry of help me. And I've seen the movie of Bill doing it, really him speaking it. And he says, and then it happened. The room lit up in such a brightness. And I remember so clearly the Venetian blind, what do you call it, the curtains, flying and hitting the Venetian blinds, banging. And this wind, this presence came through me. Really the Holy Spirit. And the obsession to drink being ripped right out of him. But he said it also was like a deck of cards you lay out. I saw every second of my drinking life. And there was awareness that in spite of this, everything is going to be okay. And when it left him, he lay there in bed and he thought he was crazy. I'm hallucinating. This is not happening. I know I'm a drunk. We can take that. But I don't want to be crazy, you know. And, you know, then Silkworth came in. And he's telling this. And he's trying to get, am I crazy? Am I crazy? And Silkworth calms him down and said, look at Bill, I'm not into spiritual things, but whatever happened, hold on to it. It's more than you had an hour ago. But here's the key. Silkworth said to him, look, Bill, I don't know what happened, but I'm going to tell you this. Something happened. Because I could see it in your eyes. Now, Bill knew something happened. Silkworth knew something happened. But the medical team did not know this. And they had a case conference with him. What do we do with this drug? How many detoxes are and Lois is telling me this. They called me up and they made a recommendation that he be committed to either Pilgrim State or Creedmoor or someplace. That this man is a gamma alcoholic, the bottom of the bottoms, and he ain't going to get 20 feet without drinking. And she told me, she says, Jimmy, I was devastated that I was going to lose Bill. And I came to the hospital the next day, and I walked into his room. He was laying in bed reading something, and all he did was look up at me. And then she said to me, Jimmy, it was like someone threw a spear across the room into my heart. When I saw his eyes, I knew in my heart he would never drink again. She told me that twice, and that's not written down. Okay? So, there's so many stories that she would tell me and my aunt would tell me of her interaction with Bill. And I showed you the books that Bill and Lois wrote, assigned to her, and so on and so forth. I became very, very close with Lois. And she was so kind to me. She always wanted to feed me, you know. I always wanted to feed me, you know. And, you know, I asked Lois and Susie, we were having lunch together one day. I said to my, when was the last time you saw Bill? Oh, there was one story. When Al-Anon was getting started, the AAs were very threatened with this. And my aunt, see, what happened with Al-Anon is this. As I said earlier to you, I tell the Al-Anon people, they don't know this, that Bill Wilson started Al-Anon. And he was going around to the different groups trying to get a group conscience on the triangle of AA, Unity Recovery Service. And would be at the AA meeting, and the gavel would go down, okay, the meeting is starting, and half of the group would get up and they'd go sit outside while the AAs had their meeting.
Okay.
And Bill saw this. He's going outside. Oh, they're the family. You know, we have to have our anonymity. So he wrote the name of the group down. He came back home. He had 88 groups he visited. And he said to Lois, listen, this is a family illness, and through the 12 steps, we all could get better. Originally, Lois wanted nothing to do with this. If you read her life, even in the movies they've made of her, you notice there was this urgency in her, a need for her to have her own home, where she could put up curtains and be a normal person. You know, Bill's going to do his AA thing, and I just want to make curtains and blah, blah, blah. But he kept talking to her. She had a friend, Ann Bingham, who she got together with. Now, my great-aunt Sue L. Started something in Jackson Heights in 1940-something or other. Okay. Her husband was a derelict drunk, brilliant man, West Point graduate. My aunt tells a story. She was an executive for a printing company, and she had to give a presentation at some company. And she said, Jack disappeared. He's on one of his runs. And I'm taking the bus on 34th Street to go over to the east side. Now, you can't make this up. The bus stops for a red light. I look out the window, and laying on the street is my husband. So I had to get off, pick him up, forget about the lecture, whatever I was giving, the talk, and I took him home. But what was my point? Bill got Lois to think about this, to get this thing going. So my aunt had started something in Jackson Heights where you just got together and vented your feelings. Really, Jack the son of a bitch. They were all son of a bitches. I thought my uncle's last name was son of a bitch. It was Jack the son of a bitch. But Lois called Sue up and says, would you help me with this? Now, Jack got into AA before this. My aunt went to her doctor, and she said, listen, I can't go on with my husband. And we're married 20-something years. Our family excommunicated her. Okay. We told you not to marry this drunken. So she was so alone. The doctor said, look, I heard of this secret society, and that's what he said, this secret society called AA or alcohol, all right? I got a name of a patient, he goes there, and my aunt called him. He gave her the number of AA intergroup. She called AA and she says, and I'm quoting her, are you drunks that don't drink? And yeah, we don't drink. Are you sure you don't drink? Yeah, we sure don't drink. Listen, I need someone to come and talk to my husband. But he has to wear a suit. And he has to be intelligent, because Jack only talks to intelligent people. And the guy kidding us says to a lady, we can't help you. We ain't got anybody who's intelligent, all right? Hey, Jack Lowry, they got anybody out in Akron intelligent? No, not out there. What are they doing? They're kidding us. But they sent this guy to talk to my great-uncle, and it didn't work. So she's crying. She calls AA. You got to send, please. So now they sent a little guy. He was a Jewish guy. They say there's no Jews in AA. They're there, believe me. And he looked like the actor Peter Falk. Mm-hmm. He was in the Venetian blind business. And he came and he had the thing with the screwdrivers on his side. And he smoked a horrible Italian cigar, and he came in, and my uncle, great uncle, tried to impress him that he was a West Point man, and he showed him his diploma with the eagle, and the flags and all that. And the guy says to him, "Oh, look at this thing, all in Latin and everything." He says, "You must be brilliant, that oh, Jack was eating it up." And he says to my great uncle, "Shithead, you'd think you would know it's the first drink that gets you drunk." And that was it. And this guy just meshed with my uncle. And he went to AA that afternoon with him. And Jack surrendered to the program. And that became his way of life. And my great aunt, she spoke for my 5th anniversary. And I had a group conscience. Because this was Al-Anon, and would you mind? Oh, they were overwhelming, absolutely. And the Al-Anon people came through the windows. They were all right to hear. And she said something was very helpful to AA and Al-Anon. I thought I was fighting Jack for 17 years with the bottle. And I learned from Lois and Bill, you weren't fighting Jack, you were fighting alcoholism. And I had to separate the two. And my husband and I, we didn't know each other as a sober couple. And we had to make a decision to go through a whole new courtship and trust each other and grow through with the 12 steps, and let's see what happens. And Susie said that when my husband died after his 25th anniversary, let me tell you what the 12 steps gave us. I lost more than a husband. I lost my best friend. So, but when Al-Anon was starting, Bill gave them the 24th Street Clubhouse, a room upstairs, which they nicknamed, quote, Lois's sweatshop. Now, he took Susie and Lois and a few to the AA World Service, and they said, "Do you have any, little kids, do you have any letters from the wives?" And AA broke out laughing and brought them into an attic room. They had to sit, and on the shelves in shoe boxes were letters from wives from all over the world. What do I do with my husband? Or what can I do with my son? And the AAs didn't know what to tell them. So they took these boxes and they went down to the 24th Street Clubhouse. And as I showed you in the book, Lois remembers her side of the whole story, where she specifically writes, my Aunt Susie, from some unknown source, would supply us with the manuscript papers. Susie was in the printing business, and at night she would go in the garbage or any paper left over, get it together, and go meet with Lois and these few women, and that's how they wrote to the wives to get donations, to get it so on and so forth. They started to grow, and Bill was so good to them. And the main thing he told them is, you've got to learn the 12 traditions. All right? And she remembered that. And I have a manuscript here that I'll show you. In fact, it's right here. So Bill, Wilson, Lois, and my aunt presenting Al-Anon. And there's a line in there where Bill says, here it is, this is 1961, but he says to them, where do I have it here? I think come on, Jimmy, where is it? Where Bill says to them, welcomes them, starting this fellowship. And Bill Wilson, I'm quoting him, that's okay. So we AAs, along with our affection and our congratulations to you, do bring you our deep regret, as well as what little restitution we can make at this late date for all the emotional, spiritual, and physical damage our drinking days imposed upon you. Right here. All right? And he guided them, and then they had to pick a name. What are we going to call this thing? And women submitted names, Wives of Souses, AA Auxiliary, so on and so forth. And my great aunt thought, well, Alcoholics Anonymous was so tied to it. Alcohol, Al, Anonymous, Non, Al-Anon. And submitted this. They voted, and as my aunt says, my Aunt Sue said, Lois pointed to her and said, Susie, you win. It's Al-Anon. You know.